Good morning and welcome to the Institute of Critical Study of Society Sunday morning program at the Niebel Proctor Marxist Library, which is now held remotely after COVID-19 pandemic, starting mid-March 2020. My name is Raj Sahai, who along with Jean Rule and 6 other members of the program committee organize our programs. The Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Niebel Proctor Marxist Library was formed around 2005 to preserve Marx's heritage, as well as to support emerging struggles for racial and gender equality and for socialism. The opinions expressed in our lectures, workshops, and publications are those of the authors only and do not represent a group consensus on the issues discussed. We may agree with them or not. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, who in his 11th thesis on Feuerbach said, the philosophers have only interpreted the word in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Our speaker today is Abhinav Sinha, who currently he certainly is committed to this thesis of Marx. I know him personally for a number of years. Abhinav has been an activist in the revolutionary movement in India since 1999. He has organized on students and youth front in India, as well on workers front in India. He writes the blog Red Polemique, has written extensively on the caste system, on B.R. Ambedkar, the Dalit leader who was the chair of the Independent India's first constitutional panel, which gave women and Dalits full equality legally. And he has also written on Hindutva fascism, on Marxist capital, on labor relations in India, on labor migration, and a variety of other issues. He is the author of the books Subversive Interventions and What is Fascism and How to Fight It. First volume of his third book, that's a multi-volume book on Soviet socialist transition, is either out or will soon be out. He's editor of the political newspaper of workers called Mazdoor Bigul, which translated in English means Workers' Bugle. He's also a member of the convening committee of the Revolutionary Workers' Party of India. That's a new political party which has formed, but he, of course, the pre-revolutionary formation of which was long-standing. The topic of his talk today is the present farmers' movement in India, a working class perspective. As a background, as most of you know, a large number of farmers, between 200 and 300,000 of Punjab, primarily from Punjab, but some from Haryana, and maybe also some from West, we have marched to Delhi. Their protest has been going on for more than 2 months, but then they decided to march to New Delhi, India's capital, in response to BJP passing 3 new farm laws in September 2020, which is 3 months ago. These are Farmers' Produce. First one is Farmers' Produce Trade and Commerce Act, which expands the scope of trade areas of farmers' produce from select areas to any place of production, collection, and aggregation. Allows electronic trading and e-commerce of scheduled farmers' produce. Prohibits state governments from levying any market fee, state or local tax on farmers, traders, and electronic trading platforms for trade of farmers' produce conducted in an outside trade area. The second bill is Farmers' Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. It creates a framework for contract farming through an agreement between a farmer and a buyer prior to the production or rearing of any farm produce. It provides for a 3-level dispute settlement mechanism, the conciliation board, some divisional magistrate, and appellate authority, but you cannot go to the court on that. So the third one is Essential Commodities Amendment Act. This allows for the center to regulate central government, to regulate, that's the federal government of India, regulates certain food items in the course of extraordinary situations like war or famine. It requires that imposition of any stock limit on agriculture produce be based on price rise. So these three laws together will change how trading of produce takes place, particularly in the states where there are organized farmers markets, and give more power to the finance capitalists in agriculture. The farmers have been stopped outside the borders of Delhi state. Delhi is a federal territory, by the way, by the police. They have camped out there for a month, and over 30 have died from exposures to cold and harsh conditions in which they are camped out. A general strike to protest the neoliberal policies of the BJP government, which is really gung-ho on the neoliberalism in India. And what many concluded also against the new farm laws organized by the labor unions in India on November 26 drew millions of participants. Some reports say about 250 million. The unions affiliated with the ruling BJP party, BJP, did not join the strike. The strike coincided with India's Constitution Day, which is 26th of November, which commemorates the adoption of the Constitution of 1949, the chairman of which was B.R. Ambedkar, and comes in the background of an unprecedented attack on workers' rights and farmers' protection by the right-wing government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But do the farmers protest in opposition to these farm laws work in the interest of rural poor? CPIM, which is the largest communist party by membership in India, and as you know, there are many communist parties in India, has supported this protest movement. Left parties generally have. Abhinav presents a different picture of this farm protest based on his class analysis of the countryside of India, in which 2/3 of the population still lives and is associated with crisis-ridden agricultural economy of India. Though the GDP of India, agriculture sector in the GDP of India, agriculture sector only accounts for less than a fifth of the total GDP. So the rural per capita income in India is less than a third of the urban per capita income. And as in the urban, so also in the rural India, income disparity is very large. Abhinav will speak for about 50 minutes or thereabouts. Then we'll have an intermission. He will answer questions following that and respond to comments. So please join me in welcoming our speaker from India and from my hometown, Abhinav Sinha.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you for this wonderful introduction. Can everybody hear me clearly? Because I'm using, okay, good.
Better now. You can hear me.
And I will apologize beforehand for this bad stubborn cough, which will interrupt me now and then. So I hope you'll bear with me. So since the entire this controversy began with the passage of the three farm bills, as Raj very succinctly summarized the basic aspects of the bill, but the political bottom line about the first two bills. First bill is the Farm Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Bill, and the second bill, which is the contract farming bill. It is called the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Bill. The target of these two bills is the regime of a minimum support price, which is fixed by a committee formed by the government. It is called Committee on Agricultural Costs and Prices. And every year or so, this committee calculates the minimum support price, which the government will pay to the farmers in the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee government markets. These committees are tripartite committees in which representatives of farmers are there, representatives of government are there, agricultural economists are there, and so with the participation of specialists, farmers representatives and representatives of government, the APMC mandis function, in which state government also has representatives. So APMCs or Sarkari mandis or government markets, whatever we call them, through these government markets, government purchases uh, mainly food grains, because government fixes minimum support price for 23 agricultural commodities, but 90% of the government purchase constitutes of wheat and rice paddy. So government purchases through these APMC mandis from farmers on minimum support price. So how this, we should first of all understand how this minimum support price is calculated. The minimum support price is calculated on the basis of comprehensive cost. Comprehensive cost, or C2 in abbreviation. This comprehensive cost has three components. First is called A2, which includes all the technological and labor input costs. So it includes the cost of depreciation of agricultural machinery, raw materials, seeds, fertilizers, hiring of labor, and all the technological and labor input costs. The second component is FL, which is family labor. So the family labor is basically calculated on the basis of the day wage, average level of day wage uh, in the agricultural economy. And then the third part is rent. So rent is included in the cost even when the farmer is not paying rent to anybody. For example, even when he's not a tenant, even when he owns his own plot of land, the rent is included. Those who are familiar with Marxist theory of ground rent will easily understand this, because in calculation of the prices of agricultural produce, it is always the worst condition which is taken into consideration. So the worst consideration will include the consideration of the cultivator being a tenant rather than a landowner. And only then in that case, the agricultural commodity can be priced in a capitalist system. So these three are the components of comprehensive cost, which includes first the which is called A2, which includes interest paid to the bank, input, all kinds of technological and labor inputs. Second is FL, family labor, and third is basically it includes rent of the land. And after that, the government gives uh, 30 to 50% uh, profit over and above comprehensive cost. That is what MSP is. Now it varies from time to time. The latest figures are somewhere between 40 to 50%. So the government pays 40 to 50% over and above the comprehensive cost, which includes every cost incurred by the farmer, possibly incurred, potentially or possibly incurred by the farmer. So the first two laws basically target this MSP system of MSP, regime of MSP. The regime of MSP was introduced in 1966, uh, just when Green Revolution was at its height. It was initiated and it was progressing in India at a healthy pace. So MSP was introduced at that time, and MSP has continued till now. And now these two bills are targeting MSP, because the first law says that now any private buyer, the peasant or farmers were even before could go to a private buyer and sell to a private buyer. But a private buyer was not allowed to come to the farm gate and buy agricultural produce from the farmers. So it is basically giving freedom to the corporate buyers, the big agribusiness companies, to go to the farm gate and buy from the farmers directly, bypassing the government market system, APMC mandi system. And it automatically means that it can or it might pay below the fixed minimum support price. So basically, in effect, though the government is saying that the MSP regime will remain, but in effect, the MSP regime will be slowly, gradually dismantled. That's what the first law targets. The second law talks about contract farming, in which any farmer, excuse me, any farmer can sell to any, can enter into contract with any private entity for a maximum period of 5 years for contract farming if the incubation period of maturation of the crop is less than 5 years. Then he can enter into a contract with any private entity, and the contract will be such in which the farmer will be required to produce a certain variety of a certain crop in a definite quantity at a prefixed price. Now, the main dispute about one of the main disputes about this law is that if there is a dispute between the farmer and the contract company, the private entity, then as Comrade Raj said, uh, the farmer cannot go to the civil court. He will have to go to a conciliation body, and then he might approach the SDM, which is a subdivisional magistrate. It is a quasi-judicial, quasi-executive post in Indian civil services. And then, so now the government has backtracked on that. The government has said that, okay, we will allow for a clause of arbitration in which the farmer will be allowed to go to the civil court. But the basic problem is that if the contract farming is taken over by the corporate capital, I'm consciously saying taken over because it is not as if contract farming is not already being done in India. Informally, contract farming is being done in India. I will come to that later, how contract farming is being done. But the main argument of these farmers organization is that if the corporate houses enter into this uh, area of contract farming, then they will hegemonize this area because they are big capital. They give the example of one Israeli company which was allowed contract farming in Andhra Pradesh by Chandrababu Naidu government, in which farmers suffered a lot. But we have also another example of Pepsi Food Corporation entering into contract farming with West Bengal farmers for production of a certain variety of potato for their chips, potato chips. So, and in that case, the farmers have benefited in the last 8 or 10 years because they are getting higher prices than the market prices. For example, the market prices of potato is somewhere around 3.40 the wholesale prices, 3.4 rupees per kg, and they are getting somewhere around 5.8 to 8 rupees per kg. So there are variety of examples where contract farming has also benefited farmers, and there are examples where farming has ruined farmers. But these are farmers who are not poor farmers. So we'll come to the second part of this presentation. The third law is something which I'll discuss in the end, because third law is something which is out and out anti-working class, anti-working masses. The debate is basically around the first two laws. So the first two laws are basically targeting the system of minimum support price. If contract farming is done by corporates and the farmers are entering into direct contract with private entities, namely the corporate big monopoly capital, the big agribusiness companies, then the farmers will sell to that company at a prefixed rate mentioned in the contract. So MSP system of MSP effectively is gone. And the first law is directly targeting MSP, which allows any private buyer to go to the farm gate and buy agricultural produce from the producer directly, and the producer also doesn't have to go through the system of commission agents of government markets. So it's kind of a, it's truly 1991 moment for Indian agriculture. It's beginning of it's opening of floodgates for the big monopoly capital in the agricultural sector. So the main target is minimum support price. So first thing we need to understand, who does benefit, who are the which is the class, what is the percentage of farmers which benefits from minimum support price? Because the Marxist method is seeking truth from facts. As Marx wrote in Capital in response to Dante, he said, in the beginning there was the deed, not the word. So let's see what is happening at the ground level. In fact, who are the beneficiary of minimum support price? So I'll give some basic data, latest data about the agrarian class structure of India. And on the basis of that data about the agrarian class structure of India, we'll see who is the beneficiary of MSP and who are the losers if the MSP regime stays or if the MSP regime is perpetuated or increased. First of all, the total agrarian population of India is 263 million. Agrarian population includes agricultural proletariat as well as the land-owning farmers. For the first time in the history of India, between 2001 and 2011, the number of uh, agricultural workers, the number of agricultural workers increased phenomenally and it surpassed the number of land-owning farmers. So in 2011, out of 263 million agricultural population, only 118 million now are constituted by the land-owning peasants, and rest, that is around 14.8 million, around 14.8, sorry, 148 million is constituted by the agricultural workers, the proletariat, those who don't have any land. So the rate of depeasantization or proletarization has been phenomenal. And the only period in which more peasants were depeasantized or left agriculture or were proletarized was between 1971 and 1980, when within the span of 10 years, 20 million peasants were forced to leave agriculture. And then we have these 2 decades from 2001 to 2011, when almost 1 crore peasants, 1 crore would be 10 million. 10 million peasants left agriculture. And from 2011 to 2020, another 10 million peasants left agriculture. As a result of this stupefying pace of proletarianization and depeasantization, today, agricultural workers by far outnumber the number of land owning peasants. But since we are talking about the peasant question, we need to see how the peasant population, the 118 million peasant population, is differentiated. 11.8 crore peasants. Out of the 118 million peasants, the number of peasants who own less than 0.4 hectare land is 33%. So 33% of 118 million peasants of India own less than 0.4 hectare of land, and only 1/6 of their income comes from agriculture. 5/6 of their income, that is 84% of their income, comes from wage labor, not agriculture. Another 34% peasants own 0.4 hectare to 1 hectare land. And of their household income, only 40% comes from agriculture. 60% comes from wage labor, either in the fields of their richer brethren, the rich peasants, rich farmers, or by migrating to cities, and what in India has been called the phenomenon of reverse tenancy, where the tenant is the rich landlord, because for capitalist agriculture, he takes land on rent from poorer peasants, because for poorer peasants, a small land holding has become economically unviable. So they give their land to the richer peasants or kulaks or farmers on rent and migrate to cities for work in industrial sector or in the urban informal economy. So 67% of Indian peasantry owns less than 1 hectare of land, which means 67% of Indian peasantry at the given level of productivity has either no marketable surplus or negligible marketable surplus, which is after their consumption, they are left with a very negligible amount of marketable surplus, or sometimes they are left with no marketable surplus at all. So first of all, MSP doesn't concern them uh, in such a way that it benefits them. It concerns them because every time MSP is increased, they are the principal losers. I'll come to that and I'll show that with facts and data why. But moving on to the agrarian class structure of Indian peasantry, Indian agriculture, 92% of all peasants own less than 2 hectares of land. So small and marginal peasants are 92% of Indian peasant population. I'm not talking about the agricultural workers. Here I'm only talking about the land owning peasantry. Out of the 118 million land owning peasantry, 92% own less than 2 hectares of land, and less than 50% of their income comes from agriculture. More than 50% of their income comes from wage labor. So this is the first important fact which we need to keep in mind. The second important fact is that 80% of peasant population is chronically indebted, not to corporate houses, not to big bank capital, but the local usurers. Now, who are these local usurers? Basically, if you go to any North Indian village, I'm not so sure about South India. I think Arun is there. He can tell us about this. In any part of North India, the 70 to 80% peasants who don't have access to any kind of institutional credit, they depend for even for their working capital on their small holdings. For because merely having a land doesn't enable you to cultivate. You need to have implements, you need to have cattle stock, you need to have capital, you need to have cash to invest in order to cultivate. And for their working capital, in order to produce on their small holding, they are dependent on the local usurers who in northern India, 9 out of 10 cases are basically rich peasants, rich farmers. This non-institutional credit is provided by this rich farmer class, and most of the 2 crore peasants, that is 20 million peasants, who have been depeasantized in the last 20 years, these poor peasants, if you look at the causes of leaving agriculture, and there is sufficiently precise statistical data about this. If you look at the reasons for leaving agriculture, it is lack of access to institutional credit and indebtedness to the local usurers, who in almost 9 out of 10 cases are basically the rich farmers and kulaks who provide them with credit. And this chronic indebtedness is the principal reason of proletarianization of the poor peasants. It has been the principal reason of proletarianization of the poor peasantry in India for past 2 decades. And even before that, I know the data about the past 20 years, but I'm sure even before that, that was the principal reason, because the poor peasantry never had any access to institutional credit. And that is why whenever agricultural loan waivers are introduced, the beneficiary are only 4.1% of peasants who take big loans from, financial institutions of government or banks or institutions like NABARD, etc., etc. So these are some of the fundamental statistics which we need to keep in mind. Now, who benefits from MSP? Returning to that question. According to government data of 2016 Shanta Kumar Committee report, only 5.8% farmers benefit from minimum support price. 5.8% of all peasants. They are the only ones who benefit from MSP because they are the only ones who have access. There are multiple reasons. First, The density of APMC, the Sarkari mandis, the government mandis markets in India, is at, you have one APMC market at 434 square kilometer. So if a poor peasant, if and when he has some marketable surplus and he wants to sell it at minimum support price in the government market, government regulated APMC markets, he needs to have access to the market, number one, because there will be transportation costs involved. Sometimes these markets are 300 kilometers away or 400 kilometers away or even 100 kilometers away is a big thing for a poor peasant. And there are costs involved in transporting the marketable surplus to the APMC markets. Second reason is that if you have to transport your marketable surplus to some government regulated market which is far away, then you also need to have access to storage facilities, which the poor peasants do not have, because not all agricultural produce have shelf life. Yes, rice and wheat do have shelf life, but even then, if there is no immediate access to government regulated APMC markets, then the poor peasantry is not going to reach these government run markets and it won't be able to sell their marketable surplus at minimum support price. So they don't have access to that. Secondly, suppose that a poor peasant somehow happens to live near an APMC market. Even then, he is the principal loser if the MSP system remains. Why? Because any peasant who is not a principal seller of food grains, but a principal buyer of food grains, is going to lose if the MSP system remains and if the MSP is increased. For example, if I'm a net buyer of food grains, not net seller of food grains, then every time MSP is increased, I will be paying more for my food, which I'll be buying from market. And if I'm a principal buyer of food grains, that even if I have access to APMC markets, then every time MSP or the remunerative prices are increased, then I will be paying more from my household monthly income on food grains. Now, these things are empirically and statistically well established facts. There are many, many studies on this. I will refer only to one because it is very pithy, short, and to the point, and very accurate. It's a study, it's called Growth and Welfare Implications of MSP, Increase in MSP, something like that. It was published in March 2003 issue of EPW. And even after that, there have been plenty of studies. There is no debate whatsoever on the question that if minimum support prices are increased, then the average price index for food grains goes up in the market. The consumer price, I'm talking about wholesale price index, WPI, as well as the CPI, consumer price index. And there is sufficient empirical evidence for that. Every time MSPs increase, because why? If you look at those who are familiar with Marxist political economy, they can understand this fact very well. The average rate of profit of Indian economy in the last 4 decades have never gone above 10%. For the past 2 decades, it has remained below 8%, the average rate of profit of entire Indian economy. I have the article that I have sent to Raj. I believe he has shared the article with everyone. So it has the link of that data. It's an essay by Michael Roberts, who has shown that the average rate of profit of all the emerging economies, so-called emerging economies like Brazil, South Africa, China, India, Turkey, Mexico, it has never gone above 8%. So if suppose 8% is the average rate of profit of the entire Indian economy, and the government is artificially paying 50% rate of profit to the rural bourgeoisie, the agrarian bourgeoisie, through the regime of MSP, then 2 or 3 things are happening here. One, there is a transfer of value from other sectors of economy, from other capitals to the agrarian sector. Number one. Number two, the higher MSP sets a higher reference point for market prices. Those of you who have always wondered why in a country where hundreds and hundreds of tons of food grains are rotten away in the government godowns every year, such a country has one third of its population living in chronic food insecurity and malnutrition. And 90% of that population is the population of Dalit agricultural workers in the villages. If you look at the population of agricultural workers in India, more than 70% of agricultural workers in certain parts of India come from Dalits, from among Dalits. And if you take the entire Indian data, it is 48%. 48% of entire agricultural landless workers are Dalits. And these are the worst paid workers. These are the worst treated workers, most oppressed section of the most exploited section of Indian working class. And these are the workers who are going to be affected most by MSP. The reason for that is that the moment the consumer price index for food grains prices increases, the larger portion of the household income of every worker, as well as poor peasants and lower middle peasants who are net buyers of food grains, not net sellers of food grain, they are going to be affected badly and adversely. And it is very much an established fact. The article by Katie Parekh et al. In EPW will give you all the data that you need. Secondly, when prices of agricultural goods, which are the principal wage goods are the goods which are bought by the working class for the reproduction of their labor power. So the agricultural goods, whenever they become dearer, there is an upward pressure on wages, because even the capitalist class needs and requires the working class to reproduce its labor power in the bare minimum condition in which it is able to continue to produce value and surplus value for the capitalist class. So there is an upward pressure on the wages. And on the other hand, the capitalists never want the real wages to increase, because there are two components of newly produced value, two components of total value. One is the product of dead labor, which is machinery and raw material and auxiliary material. And the second is the value produced by the worker, which has two parts: value equal to the value of his labor power, and the value over and above the value of his labor power, which is the surplus value. This surplus value is profit. So there are two components of newly produced value. One is the wages and the second is the profit. If the newly produced value is not increasing, and given all conditions being constant, if there is an upward pressure on wages, then there is a profit crunch, because the share of profit will decline relatively to wages. So if wages increase, even the industrial bourgeoisie doesn't want wages to increase. And that is what happened during the Corn Laws controversy in the mid 19th century in Britain. Because Britain was producing, I mean, the rural bourgeoisie of Britain was producing uh, costlier corn, and Britain was importing corn from Spain, France, and some other continental European countries, which was cheaper. So the rural bourgeoisie forced the English bourgeois state to introduce corn laws, which fixed very high tariff duties on imported corn, so that the domestically produced corn by the rural bourgeoisie becomes competitive. And the industrial bourgeoisie of Britain opposed corn laws, led by the utilitarians and some other factions of English bourgeoisie, which said that workers are hurt by rising corn prices, which was true, but that was not the concern of English bourgeoisie, industrial bourgeoisie. The concern of English industrial bourgeoisie was that if the corn prices rise, then the main component of the value of labor power, which is agricultural goods, food grains, increases, then they'll have to increase wages eventually. They can keep the wages depressed only up to a certain limit and certain time. So they wanted the corn laws to go, and corn laws were ultimately repealed. And Marx has written a brilliant article on this, on the question of free trade. I would recommend this article to every comrade coming from any political ideological background to understand what happens when the prices of food grains rise, and why industrial bourgeoisie opposes this, and why from a different independent political standpoint proletariat also opposes the rise in the prices of food. Anyway, so 90% peasants in India are not going to benefit from 90% of the peasants as well as the entire rural and urban proletariat. They are not going to benefit from MSP. They are going to lose, and it is going to affect them adversely, and it has already affected them adversely in the past 50 years, you can say, when the MSP was introduced, especially since 1980s, because 1980s, the beginning of 1980s, was a watershed in the agricultural policy. It constitutes a watershed in the agricultural policy of Indian state, because for the first time, Indian state started to spend the major portion of agricultural subsidies not on building of agricultural infrastructure, mainly composing of canal networks, because the 90% of the poor peasants, for irrigation, they are dependent on canals because they can't afford tube wells or mechanized irrigation. They can't, and that is true even today. The it is only the rich farmers and kulaks who can afford tube wells. And now, if you go in a Punjab village, you will see that due to the neglect by the state under the pressure of rural bourgeoisie of building this agricultural infrastructure in the canal network for irrigation, the poor peasants are worse off because they have to rent irrigation, mechanized irrigation facility from their richer brothers. And that is why MSP is like a double hit to them. First, it increases the prices of food grains. Second, it increases the cost of agriculture because the poor peasantry, which is dependent on monsoon and canal system for irrigation, they become dependent on rich farmers and kulaks. And this is another reason which has led to depeasantization and proletarianization of the poor peasantry in the last 2 decades. So, first of all, we need to understand that MSP is not a pro people demand. MSP is the demand of rural bourgeoisie, which constitutes only 5 to 6% of India's peasant population. Rest of the peasants owning less than 2 hectares of land, you can call them either marginal peasant or poor peasant, small peasant, or lower middle peasant. Excuse me. And everybody knows, even the neo-Narodnik communists of India and the social democrats of India, like CPI, CPM, as well as several other left groups, everybody knows this truth. If you look at studies done by some of the academicians affiliated with these communist parties, you'll find that academically they are obliged to accept the truth that MSP is going to hurt the poor, the working poor. So there remains only one ground, a few grounds, let me rephrase. There remains a couple of reasons on the basis of which they are opposing the entry of corporate capital in the Indian agriculture. One is, they say yes, MSP hurts poor, MSP hurts even poor peasants, MSP hurts 90% of peasants, but we need to oppose the big monopoly capital because it will lead to imperialist domination of India by creating food insecurity and destroying public distribution system. Now this claim holds no water. I will show you why. First of all, to link public distribution causally with MSP is factually and logically incorrect. Why? Because public distribution system in India was introduced for the first time towards the end towards the end of the Second World War by the British colonial government around 1943-44. It was not called public distribution system at that time. It was called food rationing, state food rationing system. And it was renamed public distribution system during the first 5 years plan of India between 1951 to 56. And MSP was introduced in 1966. So first point that we need to understand is that PDS predates MSP. When there was no system of minimum support price, remunerative prices, PDS was there. So PDS is not dependent on MSP. There are many countries in which there is no system like minimum support price or remunerative price. And even in those countries, there is government procurement. So government procurement of food grains is not based on minimum support price. In many countries, government undergoes through a free market process of bidding. Through bidding, government procures food grains. In some other countries, government direct buys from the free market. So the government procurement or some kind of targeted public distribution system or food rationing, it exists in most of the capitalist countries today. We are not, uh, we are not debating about the corruption involved in this kind of state food rationing system, because corruption is also involved in the system of MSP. All the middlemen, commission agents, they are, like profiteering obscenely from the system of MSP in all these. So let's first assume that we are talking about APMC system and PDS system in their theoretical purity. There is no corruption involved. There is no cronyism involved. And let's assume both of these two opposed systems are functioning correctly. Then there is no causal link between PDS and MSP. No causal link whatsoever. In fact, there is one link which shows that the health of public distribution system is inversely proportional to MSP. Now I come back to the question, why so much of food grains is rotten away in the Ford Corporation of India go downs. The reason is that government buys these food grains at minimum support price, which are created by artificially given profit rates to the rural bourgeoisie. So the prices are quite high. And the government prefers to sell those food grains to corporate players, to private bodies, to sell them to liquor companies for, brewing and all and making liquor, rather than PDS. And that is why you see that PDS was being dismantled from 1992. In 1980, Indira Gandhi made public distribution system universal. Before that, it was not a universal public distribution system. But in 1980, Indira Gandhi made it universal. This system was done away with in 1992, when the Narasimha Rao government of Congress introduced the scheme called revamped PDS, revamped public distribution system, which was basically regionally targeting certain very backward areas like hilly areas of Uttarakhand, etc., etc. And in 1997, with the structural adjustment program introduced in India, the revamped PDS was transformed into TPDS, targeted PDS. From 1997, the politics of poverty line in public distribution system comes in, and it says that those who are living below poverty line will benefit from the PDS. They will be the beneficiary of the public distribution system. And from then on, everybody knows about the politics of how to determine poverty line. I mean, it's ridiculous. 13 rupees per day or something like that. Later it was revised, but still it's laughable. I mean, it's not even laughable. You don't know how to express your amazement at this kind of power. This is not poverty line, it is line of starvation. So basically, targeted PDS was made. So PDS is being dismantled from 1992 till now. And this is exactly the period in which MSP regime was perpetuated and reinforced, and MSP has increased phenomenally during this period in an unprecedented fashion. If MSP has any positive impact on PDS, then PDS should have improved in the last 30 years, precisely the 30 years in which the system of PDS has been dismantled. So, and the last thing, If the rich peasants, kulaks, and farmers are so much concerned about dismantling of PDS, why didn't they raise this question in 1992? Why didn't they raise this question in 1997? They are raising and linking MSP with PDS only when there is a danger hovering over the system of minimum support price. They never talked about, mind you, they never talked about public distribution system. These big farmers organization, they never raised the issue of public distribution system. They were only concerned with public distribution system. And even today, they are not anti-imperialist, they are not anti-fascist, or they are not anti-big monopoly capital. Viju Krishnan, in his interview given to newsclick.in, clearly says, he says that if Modi government is talking about the welfare of farmers, we say, okay, you keep these three laws, bring a fourth law, which says that MSP is the legal right of every farmer. So that even if a private buyer comes to buy agricultural produce at the farm gate, he is legally obliged and compelled to buy it not less than MSP. He is obliged legally to pay MSP. So it is, every class when it fights a class war, and there are periods in history when contradiction between two factions of ruling class becomes principal contradiction. Otherwise, what was the War of Roses, which killed two of the leading feudal families of Europe? And that is why Engels wrote that uh, uh, the struggle of classes either leads to a higher social order or the mutual destruction of the warring classes. So there are periods in history when the ruling classes, two factions of the ruling classes, struggle for a larger share of appropriated surplus. So this is very important to understand here, that you cannot determine the class character of the present farmers movement by who is participating in it. It is true that a number of poor peasants and even agricultural workers are also joining these protests. There are three reasons for that. One, there is an anti-Modi feeling in general in the working masses. Two, the poor peasants and the agricultural workers are, attached with rich kulaks and farmers through various economic ties. One of them is indebtedness. Second of them, if you look at one of the study by a professor in Punjab Agricultural University, he says that 78% of all agricultural inputs of poor peasants, they buy it from rich farmers. Seeds, fertilizers, credit, everything they are getting from the rich farmers. So in all, it is not new. In the history of independent India, in all rich farmers protests, the main crowd comes from poor peasantry. And this is due to this reason also. The economic attachedness of poor peasantry with the rich kulaks and farmers. And third reason is the lack of political class consciousness. Because peasantry is a class about which Lenin made a very brilliant remark when he said that economic differentiation of peasantry and political differentiation of peasantry are two separate things. If economic differentiation of peasantry automatically in and by itself means political differentiation of peasantry, then the Soviet Union should not have been obliged to implement a radical bourgeois land program in 1917 after October Revolution. So Lenin said we have adopted the program of socialist revolutionaries, which is at most a radical bourgeois program, because peasantry, though it has been economically differentiated in the past 40 years, it is politically not differentiated. It lacks the poor peasants and lower middle peasants. They lack class consciousness and they tail end their richer brethren in on every issue. So there are three reasons, because if you determine the class character of any movement by who participates in it, then the Ram Mandir movement would become a proletarian movement, because the bulk majority of the car sevaks came from the working classes and working masses, either lumpen proletariat or poor peasantry, if you look. So that is not the political way of determining the class character of the movement. The class character of movement is in principle determined by the class character of its charter of demand. What is the charter of demand of the present farmers movement? It centers on one demand: minimum support price. Now, is minimum support price, is it going to benefit the working poor of India? No. Factually, no, not at all. In the last 50 years, they have never benefited the working poor of India. And even tomorrow, they are not going to benefit poor of India. So what is the position of the working class? The position of the working class is not to support either of the faction of the ruling class. Right now is struggling for a larger share in the total appropriated surplus. The position of the working class is independent, politically independent position, and to demand from the working class that we either support the rich farmers organization or Modi government, we either support rich kulaks and farmers or Adanis and Ambanis, is to deny any agency to the working class, is to deny, to trap the working class in this false binary, is the most ironic thing for communists, and the communists are shamelessly doing this. It is the logic which George Bush Jr. gave, that those who are not with us are with Taliban. No, even at that time, at the level of international class struggle, the proletariat was neither with George Bush Jr. nor with Taliban. It had its own independent political class position. And even today, the proletariat has an independent class position, that we must raise the demands of poor peasantry. What are the demands of poor peasantry, which constitute 92% of Indian peasant population? Number one, it is the demand of employment guarantee. 2011 National Sample Survey Organization, I think 61st round or 59th round, I don't remember. That survey clearly mentions that 50% of the surveyed farmers said that at the first opportunity we want to leave agriculture, we are even willing to pay bribe to get job of a government peon, a fourth grade employee, and to pay that bribe to get that job, we are willing to sell our land holding. 50% of the peasants want to leave agriculture. They are demanding employment guarantee. Second important demand of poor peasantry is, we demand the government to spend the majority of the major share of agricultural subsidy on building of agricultural infrastructure. This is not only going to help the poor peasants, it is historically progressive because it will bring the costs down. If you look at the water crisis of Punjab, it has created an ecological disaster. The ground water table has gone down so low that in the coming 30 years, the situation is going to be terrible in Punjab, the water crisis. And the only responsible factor for this are the rich kulaks and farmers agriculture, which don't pay any tax, which benefit from all loan waivers, which employ tube wells, deep bore and deeper bore tube wells, and deplete the groundwater table and increase the costs of agricultural production, thereby increasing the average prices of agricultural produce, exploiting the poor peasantry by their monopoly of these mechanical irrigation facilities and all. So we demand that the poor peasants and lower middle peasants, they are dependent, the 92% of the peasants, they are dependent on canal system and monsoon. And we demand the government to revert back to their allocation of the agricultural subsidy, which they used to have before 1980. After which, under the pressure of the rich kulak farmers politics represented by the likes of Charan Singh and all, they increased the MSP, larger portion of agricultural subsidies going to MSP, and these subsidies are financed by taxing the poor. And that is why for past 30 years, among other reasons, one of the reasons of increasing indirect taxes across all slabs is this expenditure on minimum support price. We don't want the agricultural subsidies to decrease. We want the major portion of the agricultural subsidies to be spent on increasing of productivity, increasing of agricultural infrastructure, and in principle the irrigation network, thereby decreasing the agricultural cost, which will benefit everybody because the prices of agricultural produce will go down. So these are the independent demands of poor farmers, poor peasants, not the demands of rich farmers. And the main demand the rich farmers are fighting for is MSP, which is out and out anti-people demand.
So,
And that is why,
sorry
last point, just last point,
yeah,
and
you can take your time. Let me know. You need 5 more minutes?
Yeah, just 2 minutes.
Okay.
That is why if you look at the corners from which the present movement is getting support, just have a look at them. The most decadent cultural symbols of pop culture of Punjab and Haryana, Jazzy B, Sidhu Moosewala, in these are pop stars of Punjab. Diljit Dosanjh, if you look at their music videos, it talks about, Comrade Raj will translate it better. It is called in Hindi, Chaudhar ki Hanak. How will you translate that, Comrade Raj? Chaudhar ki Hanak means?
It's pretty bad. I don't know if I want to translate it.
Chaudhar ki Hanak means, I think all my Indian friends must have understood that. Chaudhar ki Hanak is that the showing off of the economically, politically, and culturally dominant position of middle caste and high caste rich kulaks and farmers, which is very much apparent in their music videos. For example, one of the music video talks about kabza lenge. Zameen kabza karenge. That will, they will occupy land, not the Dalit. These are not agricultural Dalit workers who are talking about occupying land. These are rich kulaks and farmers singing about that they have taken the occupation of land on the basis of arms. And there is a, you know, what I should say, a kind of a sexual orgasmic link with gun culture. Every big kulak and farmer represented in these videos is sitting on a khatia, a village bed kind of thing, with a gun in his hand, with a turban kind of thing, not Sikh turban, any kind of turban, headgear, some kind of muraitha or pagdi, any kind of headgear, and sitting with a rifle in his hand, and many laborers sitting at his feet, etc., etc. These are the cultural symbols who are coming in support of this movement. Have you heard about any pop singer, any government minister resigning when thousands of workers, a lot of them Dalits and lower caste workers, died during the exodus during the lockdown after Corona? Did you come across example of any government minister or pop symbol or cultural symbols coming to support it? As Lenin said, class identifies class. There are vibes, class vibes. This movement also has some class vibes. So there are rich pizza company owners coming to sell pizza there. Yesterday, I read a news that there is a big hair salon run by some Punjabi people. They have come there and they are giving free uh, beard dye and hair dye to farmers, and they have received crores and crores of money, rupees from abroad, from NRIs, from within the India, and they are saying that we can stay here for 2 years. We have enough funds for that. So if you look at the entire class character of the movement, the charter of demand of the movement, it is very much apparent. So here I will stop because it is better to have some questions and it will allow me to elaborate some of the points in a better way.
Thank you very much, Comrade Abhinav. What we'll do now, we'll have a little intermission, a few minutes, and I will hand over the control to Gene, who will make some announcements, followed by, if he's going to do it, Richard Fallenbaum, who will make an appeal for funds, and then we'll return any other announcements, and then we'll return back to question answer, probably 3 or 4 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Gene?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was superlative, and I'm trying to get my head around that. So thank you very much for that. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Also looking forward to next week, we have our comrade Kambi Sahai, who is one of the founders of our institute. He will be speaking on 3 concepts of freedom. Brief synopsis. He will compare and contrast the liberal, democratic, and the communist concepts of freedom. He will discuss that the liberal concept of freedom consists of the rights guaranteed against outside intrusions. Democratic freedom emphasizes the right to participate in the life of the community, and the communist understanding of it consists of self-determination, i.e. a non-alienated life. So I hope that whets your interest. Our speaker, Kambi Sahai, was born and educated in Iran, and his studies consisted of sociology, Middle Eastern studies, and psychology. And he has lived and worked in the Bay Area for the past 30 years. So we're looking forward to that next year. And we have other things. You can consult our webpage for our complete schedule. And also there is a fund appeal, I think, in our regular emails, but if Richard is here, perhaps he can talk you out of your money. So Richard, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I placed in the chat some information about how you can contribute to ICSS. Currently, we don't have a way of receiving money from outside the United States, so I urge people outside the United States to contribute to their organizations. But within the United States, you can contribute through PayPal or through a check to the United States Postal Service. We really do need the money, especially now would be a good time for people who are not prevented from spending money other ways during the holiday season to send us a few bucks.
Have you considered trying to accept Bitcoins? Because then you could accept donations from anywhere.
Well, we could consider it, but I'm a little challenged technologically about how we could convert Bitcoins into currencies and handling the whole thing. But
so typically you do that through an exchange. Most exchanges are pretty modern. You just hook them up to your bank, and then they will wire the funds directly to whatever bank your organization uses.
Okay, we'll look into it, and maybe you and I could communicate. But anyway, using the legacy methods for now, please consider using PayPal or sending a check or even cash. The library needs it, and we do have some immediate costs also. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to Abhinav for staying. It's past midnight. He started speaking. He joined just 11:45 p.m. His time. It's already past 1, but he says, don't worry, he will stay on and answer all the questions. So please raise your hands, either visually through your image, or better yet, through the internet. And I see a number of hands raised. And first 3 on my list are Sharon Rose, Norma Harrison, and Sandeep Agarwal. So let's start with those 3. Sharon, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhinav, very much.
Thank you.
I, for one, was thinking of it in binary terms, so you opened my eyes to the reality. I have a question about agribusiness. So the reduction of the proletarianization of farm workers
Pardon me, what? Come again, comrade?
Peasants.
Yeah, the proletarianization of people who are farm workers in general, it usually is there's a part of the cause of it, I'm talking worldwide, or speaking about the United States, for example, accompanied by consolidation of farms and the ownership of more and more of farm production by big agriculture. And I'm wondering to what extent that is happening in India. And the other question that goes along with it is the mechanization, or as a Chinese student told me 10 years ago, she said, I'm going to study agricultural engineering because we need robots in our fields. And that's what the Chinese are doing. And to what extent is that the robotization of agriculture happening in India?
Okay, do you want to answer one at a time, and or you want to take more than one question, Abhinav?
Alan is saying I should take one at a time.
Okay, fine. Let's go.
So the proletarization of worker, as you rightly pointed out, also leads to changes in the structure of land ownership. And in India, what has happened, the number of land magnates has decreased, but the land under their control has increased. So if you look at the number of farmers who own more than 4 hectares of land, that has decreased steadily and very sharply in the last 10 years, but steadily, especially since the Green Revolution, 1966, 67. But despite the number of upper middle and large landowners decreasing, the total area under their control, the total amount of land under their control is increasing, which is only showing centralization and concentration of land holdings in fewer hands. So you have fewer number of landowners, big landowners, but a greater portion of that area under there. Second point is that most of the land, if you look at the big agribusiness companies like Pepsi Food Corporation, etc., they now have some big farms in India, in different parts of India, in Tarai, Uttarakhand, in one part of North India, in Punjab. They have big farms, but still larger portion of big land holdings are not under big agribusiness companies, but big capitalist rentier landlords and capitalist farmer landlords of India. So Indian rural bourgeoisie in that sense is quite strong. And that is why they are opposing the entry of big monopoly capital in Indian agriculture, because they know that once they enter, they will die a slow death. It will take 20, 30 or maybe 40 years, but they will die a slow death. So yes, land concentration has increased. Mechanization also has increased. I'll give you only one picture. The highest rate of mechanization is in Indian agriculture is happening in Punjab. So in Punjab, in the last 1 decade, if you look at the sale of power tillers, it has increased by 3 times, which is almost 400% increase in the sale of power tillers, and almost 350% increase in the sale of tractors. 16% of tractors of entire India, they are only in Punjab alone. So if you go in Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, and certain parts of Uttarakhand, the mechanization is really surprising. You'll see sometimes if you go to these villages during the high season, you'll see this line of harvester, huge harvester combines going on the highways, and in overtaking them at 60 kilometers per hour, it sometimes takes 15 minutes to overtake that entire line, that caravan of harvester combines and all. So mechanization also has increased very sharply in Indian agriculture. And that is a very progressive thing historically speaking, because the logic, Marx opposed two logic. One, he opposed the logic that mechanization will lead to decline in employment in absolute terms. He said that yes, given the profit rate and accumulation of capital are constant, the mechanization will decrease employment per unit. So less number of workers will be required to run the same machine, basically. So lesser number of worker per machine. But then the other law of capitalist production is expanded reproduction. So Marx says that even if mechanization happens, historically it's progressive because it is making the process of labor much simpler, easier, and less exacting for human body. And it saves time. And that is why he says that once we reach the stage of communism, rest of the history will be the prehistory of humankind, because we'll produce the necessary things and services for our life in only 1 or 2 hours, For the rest of the 6, 8, or 10 waking hours, we'll do ideological, cultural, and literary production. So, and that is why mechanization is a progressive thing, but as in Hindi, we say that it's a बंदर के हाथ में उस्तरा क्यों क्या बोलेंगे राज जी बंदर के हाथ में उस्तरा is like shaving
It's
blade
like,
in the hand of a monkey.
yeah,
So advanced technology is a shaving blade in the hand of a monkey. You can shave with it and you can cut your throat with it. It depends on which hand is holding it.
A
So
two-edged sword.
yeah. So so the logic, many people in today in India also are opposing farm laws. They are saying that corporates will come, mechanization will happen, employment in agriculture will reduce. Marx would have said, not necessarily. It depends on the rate of accumulation of capital, number one. Number two, in agriculture, there is always hidden unemployment where people are living at the level of starvation and also in the illusion that they are employed, but actually they are surplus labor flows in agriculture. So the basic problem is to create jobs for the surplus labor living in hidden unemployment and in starvation and in indebtedness in the agricultural sector, in the industrial sector, creating jobs for them in the services sector and industrial sector. That capitalism can do and cannot do depends on the health of profitability, the basic logic, the profitability of the system. So if the profitability is low, definitely any technological advancement will lead to decline in employment per unit machine. But that is only one situation. So yes, mechanization has increased. The population involved in agriculture has decreased. Out of the total workforce of India, now hardly 50% are involved in agriculture. Actually, greater portion of Indian workforce is now involved in, the greatest portion is involved in services sector, the production of non-tangible commodities, simply, and industrial sector, the production of tangible commodities. So that is very much clear, and it will happen. To stop it, to try to stop it, and to create a romantic nostalgia to return some kind of glorified past, glorious past, which is always a constructed past. There was no such glorious past. To return to some glorious past where people are living in harmony in their village community. That is Sismondi's and Proudhon's logic, not Marx's logic.
Right,
And that is not going to happen anyway.
right.
okay. Thank you, Abhinav. We'll go to Norma Harrison, followed by Sandeep, followed by Richard Wright.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to mention, people who are not familiar with what you were saying, there is a participants option at the bottom of your screen where you can raise your hand, is what one of the things he was talking about. You all have been talking exactly about what I was in the conversation, what I was going to bring up. My thought is that our owners, and I use a capital O for the owners, we're owned by the rich, period. We are all enslaved to it, period. Our owners have realized that they don't want to subsidize us farming. They've created statuses out of different work behaviors, and those are what profit our owners. They are not what are meaningful for our behavior. So there was a program on PBS a week or two ago called Deeply Rooted, about John Kuykendall, C-O-Y-K. John Kuykendall collecting seeds that he would share with people, ancient seeds. And it was in Louisiana that he toured a lot, fairly recently, past 100 years or so. And they showed shots of people on farms dancing, having dances, having get-togethers for one reason or another. I'm not saying that it was easy, but largely that's because it's not subsidized by the community's work. If it were constructed as a communist venture, it would be taken care of and people would live well, they'd have decent housing, so forth. food, so forth, but it doesn't get subsidized so that our owners can grab the land, get us off the farms and buy these machinery that they create, the whole institution of modern farming, which is antithetical to human beings and has to be perceived as such. We have been backed off, eradicated. All of us dying right now is emblematic of the attitude about people in general. We don't have structures to take care of ourselves, and we're derided.
I think we have 2 minutes over. Can you wrap it up, please? Your statement.
Can I please? I've got a couple of things more to say about this.
We have a lot of
Come
people
back
on
second
the-
time.
on the-
Come back second time. Yeah. Wrap this one though.
So we're looking at a world where labor-intensive production is subsidized, where everybody's comfortable, where we spend maybe 2 hours a week in the field doing whatever's necessary instead of the machinery and enjoying putting our hands in the dirt. We decolonize our thinking and our approach to how we live on Earth so that we can have an objective to strive for that feels good, that is not only about us being workers, but about us being the humans that enjoy life on Earth, which is the opposite of the status and relationships we are allowed to have now, because we are not allowed,
Okay.
we are not, one
Thank
second,
you.
we are not allowed to help each other.
Yes,
We
thank you.
require charity, and charity is against our way we should be.
Okay, thank you, Norma. So we're going to go. Do you want to respond to it, or you want to take another question, since this was mostly comment, Comrade?
Yeah, it was mostly a comment. Most of the things I would broadly agree to. The only thing that I would say that the question of subsidies, because Comrade Norma raised the question of subsidies also, we need to look at the question of subsidy also from a class standpoint, because we are not opposed to subsidy given to within the ambit of capitalism, obviously. Within a socialist system, there is no need for class subsidies as such. So within the ambit of capitalism, if the state is giving subsidy, what is the position that we should assume? I believe that there are two questions involved on the basis of which we should take a pro or anti position to subsidies. One, is the subsidy helping the working masses, or is the subsidy helping the exploiter? Second, the subsidy is funding by progressive wealth tax, or subsidy is funding by across slab indirect taxes. Today, in the case of agricultural subsidies of India, the subsidy is mainly benefiting the rich kulaks and farmers.
Yeah, but
through
I'm not
MSP.
talking about that.
No, I'm making an independent point.
Right.
That I'm making an independent point, because this question is coming up again and again in the ongoing controversy. So the first thing is that the MSP should be, the system of MSP should be repealed and replaced by expenditure of agricultural subsidies on building of agricultural infrastructure and network. And secondly, this subsidy should be funded by levying progressive wealth tax on rich classes of Indians. That is the only possible two yardsticks for a Marxist to determine whether a subsidy is valid or not. In general, support for subsidy is stupid. Subsidy for whom? And by whom and how?
Okay, thank you. So I don't see Sandeep, whose hand was next. Sandeep is not there, so.
No, I'm here, Raj.
Okay, Sandeep, please go ahead.
Hey, Abhinav, excellent talk. Thank you.
Thank
I had
you.
3-4. Good to see you. It's been a while. Hey,
Yeah.
I have 3-4 questions. I'm going to shoot them rapidly. And one, I have read that especially in Punjab, because much of the protests have arisen from Punjab and Haryana, the small and middle peasants sell their entire produce. They don't consume anything. They sell their entire produce in the APMC markets, and they buy the grains for consumption at a cheaper price from the market, open markets. So this could probably explain why you're seeing so many small and middle peasants also in the demonstrations, among other factors that you have listed. The second thing I wanted to ask is, especially in Punjab, a lot of rural proletariat is actually migrant labor. It's not the local, and I don't know what it plays in terms of the character of these protests. I'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah.
The third question was, you talked about rate of profit. I mean, wouldn't you want to increase the price of land also while calculating rate of profit, not just the inputs, factors of production? And if you include the price of land, which is very high in Punjab, the actual rate of profit is not 50%, but much lower, I think.
Yeah.
And lastly, could you possibly explain why the Kulak class in Punjab is sort of against, the three bills, but the Kulak class in Maharashtra, Shetkari Sangatna and all are actually pro the bills, So why is there so much regional differentiation? I'm going to shut up now. I think there are a lot of other questions, but these 4 questions, and you don't have to answer all of them.
Yeah. In fact, I would like to thank you, Comrade Sandeep, for asking these questions, because these were the questions which, in the lack of enough time, I had to, kind of skip. So thanks for asking these questions. One, you made a very accurate point about the peculiarity of Punjab. We talked about the agrarian class structure of India, where 92% peasantry owns less than 2 hectares of land. But in Punjab, only 34% of peasantry owns less than 2 hectares of land. So as the main beneficiary of Green Revolution, you see the impact in the difference in the agrarian class structure in Punjab, number one. Number two is that in Punjab, yes, the section of peasants who are able to sell at MSP is larger, but it is still a very small portion of entire peasantry. The reason for that is that APMC Mandi, if you just look at the density of APMC Mandis in Punjab, the APMC Mandis, in Punjab, we have one APMC Mandi at every 118 kilometers square kilometers. So if you go on an average, if you go 11 kilometers in any direction, you will come across an APMC Sarkari Mandi. So yes, since the infrastructure is better, the bulk of middle peasants also have access to APMC Mandis, and a lot of small peasants also have access to APMC Mandis. But if you look at the average prices of food in Punjab, it is much higher than Bihar. I'll send you one article, a small Facebook note written by one of our comrades, which has given you the average consumer price index and wholesale price index for food grains in Bihar and Punjab. So food grains are much cheaper in Bihar, and one of the problems which Punjab farmers are facing right now is that a lot of adhatiyas are the middlemen, commission agents in the APMC mandis. They are going to Bihar, and in Bihar, rice, paddy and wheat are so cheaper than Punjab, that they are buying in bulk from Bihar and dumping the APMC market of Punjab with cheaper rice, paddy and wheat from Bihar, because it increases their commercial profit margin. So,
so arbitrage, basically arbitrage, pick up from one market, go sell it to the market.
Yes, but the funny thing is that the cost involved in buying from Bihar's market and bringing it to Punjab's APMC market is so low than the overall margin of commercial profit that they are getting from it. I mean, in terms of political economy, you can only talk about entrepreneurial profit or profit of enterprise, what Marx calls rent, interest, and commercial profit. All kinds of commissions and arbitrage are basically commercial profit, if you use Marxist terminology. So the commercial profit that they are getting from buying cheaper in Bihar and selling dearer in Punjab APMC is huge. So if the transportation cost is, even that is not able to upset that kind of commercial profit. So the first fact is correct. A larger portion of small and middle peasants in Punjab are able to sell in APMC Mandi. And even then, they are not able to buy cheaper. That is a false information. That is not correct. If you look at the average price index of Punjab and compare it with states which have no sound MSP system, it is higher. If you compare it with West Bengal, if you compare it with Bihar, with repealed the APMC Act in 2006, if you compare it with Kerala, Kerala has the lowest consumer price index in India, and Kerala never had any system of APMC. It never repealed because it never had any system of APMC. So they are not buying cheaper. But yes, a larger portion of small and middle peasants in Punjab are selling, and that is why you are exactly correct that the epicenter of the present protest is Punjab. But even then, if you look at the concrete data, not more than 20 to 25% of all farmers of Punjab are actually selling at MSP. Even within Punjab, this is much higher than the Indian percentage, which is Indian average, which is around 6%. In Punjab, it is 20 to 25%. There are many studies, and on the basis of different yardsticks used, the percentages vary. But yes, it is higher. But not all, not majority of them are able to sell on MSP. So even there, the net buyers of food grains are losers. And that is why if you look at the per capita rural income in Punjab, it is declining in the past 20 years. Precisely the period when the MSP has increased phenomenally. And even then, the richest section of Punjab rich farmers is growing richer. The rate of accumulation is good. The mechanization is good. If you look at the rate of sale of agricultural machinery and agricultural inputs like seeds and fertilizers, you'll see that the gross value addition and value formation in Punjab agriculture is highest in India. But still, the bulk of the peasantry is getting pauperized and depeasantized. The reason for that is precisely this. They are not able to buy cheap, but yes, a larger portion of Punjab farmer population is able to sell some part of their produce in the APMC mandis at MSP due to the peculiarity created in case of Punjab after the Green Revolution due to state patronage, and it became the kind of the main land where this experiment of Green Revolution was done. Second question, yes, rural proletariat has basically two components. One is the migrant labor, and second, we must not forget that Punjab has the highest percentage of Dalit population. And it is the Dalit population in Punjab, it's around 23, 24%, 27%, I guess. So the last data is 27% of Punjab population comes from Dalit caste. And it is the Dalit work laborers in villages who are, highly exploited during, all these agricultural seasons, the Rabi season, Kharif season. These are, and one anecdote will clear this thing very much. Today, the farmers' organizations are talking about worker-peasant unity, workers-farmers unity. During the lockdown, what happened? The migrant labor couldn't go to Punjab. A lot of migrant labor returned from Punjab. So there was a labor shortage, serious labor shortage during the high time of season of agriculture. So agricultural wages went up because supply went down drastically because inflow of migrants was curtailed and the wages went up. So in most of the Punjab villages, the Jat Kisans held their panchayats and set a ceiling on agricultural wage and said that no farmer will be allowed to pay more wages than that to the Dalit agrarian workers in Punjab. And if any agrarian worker from our village goes out to work, we'll do social boycott of that worker. So these precisely the same farmers who 2 or 3 months ago were setting ceiling on agricultural wage of agricultural workers are today fighting for a floor level for their agricultural produce, which provides them 50% profit over comprehensive cost. And for this demand, they are asking workers peasant unity. There can be no greater farce than that. So that is the truth of the labor condition in Punjab. Second, the rate of profit, if you are looking at the price of land, you'll have to look at the rate of land rent, because price of land is basically determined by the looking at the relation at the rate of interest and the rate of profit. So if you are going to calculate the rate of land in Punjab, you'll get a higher land price because the rate of profit is high. If the rate of profit is high, the land prices will go up because any person who is selling his land will calculate the rate of interest vis-a-vis the average rate of profit. So the rate of land is matters only in two conditions. One in which the rich tenant farmer, capitalist farmer, not land, because Marx makes a distinction between three kinds of farmers. One is capitalist farmer landlord, one is capitalist rentier landlord, and one is rich capitalist farmer, tenant farmer, sorry, rich capitalist tenant. So the rich capitalist tenant is going to be affected adversely by the high rate of land rent only when the productivity is low and rate of profit is low. If the rate of profit is healthy, then higher land rent is, it's like a Ouroboros, snake chasing its own tail. So if you know,
It's a consequence. It's not a cause.
yeah, it's not a cause. And the fourth is the the Maharashtra rich farmer class and Kulak class is not opposing these three. For example, you exactly pointed Raju Shetty's Shetkari Sangathan and Swabhiman Sangh, the two biggest farmers organizations. They have welcomed these laws for two reasons. One is out of the 80,200 rupees, crore rupees government procurement, 80% happens in Punjab and Haryana. One reason is this. So if the MSP regime is dismantled, it is going to affect the farmers of Punjab and Haryana in the main. The second reason is that there is a overlapping between the class of Adhatiyas, the middlemen, the commission agent, and the rich kulaks and farmers in Punjab and Haryana. If you look at any APMC commission agent, it is many personalities combined into one. So it is, you'll find that it is the rich kulak and farmer is also the Adhatiya, he's also the usurer, and he's also the merchant providing agricultural implements, seeds and fertilizer to poor and lower middle peasants. So basically it's 4 in 1. So it is exploiting the agricultural workers and poor peasants in all four forms of which the surplus value assumes in a capitalist system. That is entrepreneurial profit, because he's the one who employs wage labor to work on their fields and appropriates the surplus value. Second is mercantile profit, because he underbuys from the poor peasants are underselling to these rich farmers, and these rich farmers are then selling at MSP in the APMC market, and they are getting 2.5% commission over and above MSP as commission agents in the APMC, and they are charging as high as 20 to 30% rate of interest on the non-institutional credit that they are providing to the agricultural workers as well as the poor peasants. So they are looting and plundering the poor peasants and agricultural workers in all four forms that surplus value assumes in a capitalist system: profit of enterprise, mercantile profit, rent, and interest. So, and in Maharashtra, that is not the condition. The class of commission agents is, it has a very small negligible overlapping with the farmers. So the farmers are opposed to the commission agents because the commission agents are, there is a contradiction between commission agents and farmer also, where these are two persons. If there are one person, there is no contradiction. Obviously, they are taking two parts of the surplus value. But if there are two persons, then there will be tussle to increase their share of surplus value. As always happens in capitalist system in general, interest bearing capital tries to take the greater part of entrepreneurial profit, but there is a dynamics of capitalism. If rate of interest goes above average rate of profit, then there will be an investment strikes. Nobody will invest. So, but there is a constant tussle between the interest bearing capital and entrepreneurial capital. That happens in the case of agricultural capitalism also. So the fourth, that is why not only in Maharashtra, you are not seeing big protests in any other states of India. All the peasants, we went to the demonstration site. We have recorded almost 100 to 150 interviews of farmers on the protest site, which is the border of Delhi, basically two borders, Singhu border and Tikri border. And all the farmers are saying, we want MSP full stop. There is no anti-fascist agenda. Only one union organized a protest for release of political prisoners like Umar Khalid and all. Gautam Navlakha, Sudha
You have to
Bharadwaj.
shut up.
Yeah, Ekta Ugraha, BKU Ekta Ugraha, that is the union which organized, and all the 32 unions opposed BKU Ugraha, that you are trying to diffuse the focus. Our focus is only MSP. Don't use it politically for your own political purposes. We only want MSP. We don't care about Umar Khalid or Sharjeel Imam or Gautam Lalakha or Sudha Bharadwaj or Vermont Godalvis or Varvar Rao or GM Saibaban. We don't care. We want MSP, and please don't use this protest to, canvas for the release of political prisoners.
Okay,
That's
can
all.
we move? Can we move?
Yeah.
Are you finished with your thing? Because a lot of people are waiting. So
Yeah.
on my list is,
Raj, is anyone
you
else hearing
recognize,
squeaking?
excuse me.
I hear a lot of squeaks.
Okay. So let me say who is next. Next 3, 4. Okay. Richard Wright is next, followed by the person on the phone. 5513 is the phone number. I think maybe Elazar. I don't know if he is, but that he's number 2. Then Sarhak is 3rd. Yusuf Gursi is 4th. And then Balaji Narasimhan 5th. So that's the sequence in which we will go. I hope I haven't made a mistake, but if I have, please forgive me. There may be one shifting. So Richard, please go ahead with your comment or question.
Sure. First, let me say I know it's been brought up before, and so the questions I have may be my problem, but I have a real hard time paying attention, not paying attention, but understanding what it is you're saying, and that it's not a reflection on you necessarily, but it's just very hard sometimes to get through the accents. So if I ask something that or that you've addressed, I apologize in advance. One just quick kind of technical note. You talked in terms of the number of peasants, and my question here is, how many peasants are in a family, or is that, because sometimes you may have somebody who goes to work in an industry and then somebody who stays in a family that stays at home and tends the farm. So that's the other one. More importantly than that is that it seems to me, and I know you addressed this a little bit. I think you talked about the Soviet Union and their attempts to deal with the farming question. I don't recall hearing you mention, or you may have mentioned in passing, the same thing was true in China. And both have had problems dealing with the agricultural question. I guess in particular, how do you address this? The problem, it seems to me, is and how do you get these peasants to get together? Marx sort of saw the trade unions as a way of as a preliminary, as a school for teaching the proletariat to come together, but I don't see that he ever addressed the same kind of thing to peasants. And peasants, at large, are very notorious for being independent.
That's 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, okay, I'll leave it at that. I had a couple others, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yes, so I should respond to this question first, no?
Yes.
Okay. So one is the number of peasants. When we talked about the number of peasants in India, it is basically the number of peasant households. People involved, because it's generally, but it's not very accurate, because sometimes in one family, 2 people report to the census data collectors that I'm involved in agriculture. So the problem with the state data that you have to make approximations and you have to deconstruct and decipher them. But it is true that in the works, because it is the part of the workforce of India. So the workforce of India is about 60 crore people. That is 600 million people. Out of 600 million people, only 263 million people are involved in agriculture. And out of that, only 118 million people are actually peasants who own land. Since there is a question of owning land, we can assume that the number of peasants that has been mentioned in the census data of India is basically largely overlaps with the number of peasant households in India. So if we are talking, because there is generally one peasant involved there. Sometimes small peasants are working with family labor, and sometimes they are not. So it is very difficult to guess the exact number, but broadly you can say yes, around 118 to 120 million would be the number of landowning peasants. Second, I think in Soviet Union and in China, the peasant questions were dealt in a different way because China progressed from the stage of new democratic revolution to socialist revolution. And when the Chinese Communist Party organized, the Chinese peasantry, uh, it was from a different perspective because the entire peasant class was the part of revolutionary class alliance because the common enemy were the feudal lords and imperialism. And against feudal lords and imperialism, even rich peasants and upper middle peasants were allies, though Mao called rich peasants as vacillating allies. And the more solid allies were the middle and poor peasants. But even the rich peasantry was not an enemy class. Rich peasantry or kulaks and farmers, they become an enemy class only in the stage of socialist revolution when capitalism has developed. So in the Soviet Union, the question of who is ally among the peasant class was very clear. For Lenin, it was in his famous booklet to the rural poor, he very clearly mentions that it is the poor peasantry and rural semi-proletariat which is the most solid ally of proletariat, and the vacillating ally of proletariat is the middle peasant. The rich peasants and landlords are not allies of revolution in the socialist state. They are allies only in the democratic state, in the stage of democratic revolution against czarist aristocracy. So the democratic faction of the rich peasantry or they can be allies. So in China, it was dealt historically in a different way because the process or trajectory of development of revolution was different. But yes, the question, how do you get the peasants organized? So Lenin said we need to make two things. One, poor peasant committees, and two, unions of agricultural laborers. In fact, he has a short article on the need of union of agricultural workers. So agricultural workers need to be unionized just like industrial workers, though their concrete issues will be different from industrial workers. And the poor peasants, they need to be organized in their poor peasant organizations, poor peasant committees. So there will be different organizational forms for getting them organized.
Okay, so the person next is, I don't see the person with the last four numbers of the telephone who's joining by telephone, 5513. Maybe that person is there. Is that Elazar? If you're there, please.
Is that Richard?
Nobody on by that, Raj. Go ahead and move on.
Okay, so we will go next to, who did I mention?
Sarhak.
Yusuf. Sarhak and Yusuf. Sarhak first, then Yusuf after.
Yes. Good evening, comrade. This is Sarthak.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question that I had was, so can you please throw some light on the electricity bill issue? Like what are the demands that are put forth by the farmers' organizations regarding this electricity issue? Because like I saw some posts which claim that this is also a demand which benefits, like which impacts the whole of peasantry, like it impacts all the farmers. So does it actually like, is it actually a demand of the whole peasantry, or it actually concerns the upper sections of the peasantry or the rich farmers and kulaks? And what should be a proper working class perspective on this issue? So yeah, that one question I had.
I have not delved deep into the issue of electricity bill. What seems to me, from from whatever I have studied till now, is that electricity bill is going to increase the privatization of electricity distribution and production in general. So it is an anti-people demand in general. So we should oppose it. Yes, it will affect not only entire peasantry, but I think it will affect the entire people in general. So I have to look into this matter more in a deeper fashion. But so far, whatever I have gathered from the newspaper reports and editorials, I think yes, it is an anti-people demand, and yes, it is not only a demand. The repeal of this act is not simply a demand of rich peasantry; it is demand of the agricultural proletariat, urban proletariat, and the poor and middle peasantry also. So it seems to me that we should raise the demand of repealing of electricity bill 2020. But a concrete, nuanced position on this question can be taken only when one has studied the question, in a deeper fashion.
Okay, so Yusuf followed by Balaji, followed by Richard Fallenbaum, and then Vishal. These are the next four. I'll come back to Norma after everybody who has not spoken first has spoken. So with that, please proceed in that order. So it's Yusuf, you're next.
Okay, thank you.
Your volume is very low to me. I don't know if you, Abhinav can hear you.
Low to me too.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Has the COVID crisis played any role in recent events, and has there been any solidarity from India's neighbors, particularly South Asian neighbors?
Come again. What about South Asian neighbors?
Has there been any solidarity?
Solidarity regarding the COVID crisis?
No, the peasant demands.
Yeah. This two things. One, COVID crisis has allowed the Indian state to illegalize any kind of challenge by giving the, for example, the ruling party is running crowded election campaigns even during the elections, but it is delegalizing and illegalizing all kinds of workers' protests, and also, but not so much farmers' protests. For example, all the workers' protests have been illegalized anywhere where workers tried to, gather for any kind of protest or resistance. They were, immediately scattered by the armed forces and police, etc. But these farmers were also shown the fear of COVID crisis, and that in Delhi there is an emergency situation as far as Corona crisis is concerned. But they were not uh, uh, not allowed assembly. They are still sitting in thousands of numbers at Delhi's borders. So COVID crisis has, yes, given the state it's a real thing, but it has given the state an opportunity to illegalize and stop protests and meaningful resistance. Not farmers' protests so much, but yet working class protests was being suppressed and illegalized by them. As far as solidarity from South Asian countries is concerned, not so much from our immediate neighbors, but this farmers' protest has, got support from Canada, NRI's community in Canada, UK, and the US, because a lot of NRIs are from Punjab. Basically, they have migrated to Canada, US, and UK, and in Canada, US, and UK, they are part of the working class, proletariat. But at back home in India, they are often they belong to some upper middle or rich farmers family or middle farmers family. So that is why we are seeing this overwhelming support that the farmers movement is getting from especially the countries where there is a big Punjabi diaspora. So
COVID crisis played an economic role. Has it exasperated the economic crisis that led to these protests?
Yeah, not of agricultural. Interestingly enough, agriculture was the only sector which recorded positive growth rates during the COVID crisis, around 2% growth rate. Rest, the two other sectors of Indian economy, manufacturing and services, they recorded negative growth rates during the COVID crisis, during the lockdown. The only sector in Indian economy which recorded a positive growth rate was agriculture. So I don't think COVID crisis particularly hit agriculture. Agriculture was one sector which was particularly exempt from any economic repercussion of the COVID crisis. So protests
Okay.
are not result of exacerbation of economic crisis by COVID in agricultural sector, not in the case of agriculture.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. So Balaji Narasimhan is next, followed by Richard Fallenbaum and then Vishal. So these are the next three. Before we go to somebody who's spoken, I see Norma's hand is up, but I would like to see first those who haven't asked the question have a chance first. So Balaji, please go ahead.
Yes, I'll keep my question short. Overall, what should be our attitude towards the three farm laws put together? Should we support them or should we oppose them?
Yeah. So my position is that we need to look at these farm laws separately, because the third farm law is out and out an anti-people law, because it can be called a black marketeering law. Basically, it allows, and believe me, the demand for removing cap on stocking of essential commodities was a long-standing demand, not only of the financial bourgeoisie, but also of the rich kulak and farmer class in Punjab, which is also the middleman and the usurer. So had the government brought only the third law, which removes cap from stocking of essential commodities, we might not have seen this kind of militant movement of farmers of Punjab. It is only the first two laws which they basically are targeting. But as you know, they can't target it as such, because all these movements of factions of ruling class have ideological character, a fetish character. So they have to talk about the three laws as a group. But we need to distinguish between the three laws. The third law is out and out an anti-people law. The first two laws allows for the corporate capital to come. We don't support, for example, the working class in England did not support or oppose the repeal of corn laws. And Marx was against, he said that we are not for or against free trade. As far as free trade goes against the immediate exploiter and oppressor of rural proletariat, we are for free trade. As far as free trade system regime goes against the proletariat, we are against the free trade. So if free trade is being introduced in the sector of agriculture, we are for free trade insofar as it destroys the hegemony of the rich kulaks and farmers, and destroys the protection, which is a very costly protection given to the rich farmers and kulaks in the form of MSP, whose cost is being exacted from the working class for past 50 years. A larger portion of agricultural subsidies to be spent on building canal system and agricultural infrastructure, so the cost of production comes down for poor peasants and their livelihood can be bettered. And secondly, that you provide us, because there is an excessively large surplus population in agriculture, you should provide us with employment guarantee. If the state agreed in case of rural workers that it is a state which is responsible and accountable for providing employment to the rural workers in the NREGA, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, then you universalize it. The state should take this responsibility universally, that all citizens of India are entitled to the right to work. So it is the right to work and transfer of agricultural subsidies from MSP to building of agricultural subsidies. So we cannot simply say whether we support or oppose the first two laws. We have our own set of demands, which see the two laws critically, but not from the standpoints of rich farmers and kulaks, from our own independent class standpoint.
Okay, so there are two people here who have not spoken, who raised hands. One is Richard Fallenbaum, And next is Vishal. Comrade, our time officially is up, but if you are available to continue for a few more
I
minutes.
can take these two questions because you have mentioned these two names.
Okay, so
Comrade Richard and Comrade Vishal.
Richard Fallenbaum
Well,
and
thank
then
you.
Vishal.
Your comments about the opportunism of the communist parties in India struck a chord with me because I in the United States, opportunism is rife among the Marxist group. I wonder if you would want to expand on your comments on how you feel it can dealt with, what are the causes of it, anything you can add would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Comrade, the opportunism of a lot of revolutionary communists, leaving aside the social democrats, the parliamentary left, even the revolutionary communists, this opportunism is emanating from not some kind of dishonesty, but in my analysis, it is emanating from a sense of defeat, a very deep pessimism and a very deep sense of defeat. Because in the past 30 years, we have seen the rise of Hindutva fascism. The communist forces in India have fought bravely, but due to their own programmatic understanding and due to their own tactical and strategic mistakes, they have been unable to put forth any meaningful challenge or resistance to the fascist power. So a lot of communists are giving the argument that yes, it is a rich farmers movement. Yes, minimum support price is a demand of rich farmers and kulaks. But since it is challenging Modi, Narendra Modi, the fascist government of India, since it is challenging the fascist government of India, we should support it. Our argument is very simple. The present rich farmers movement is not an anti-fascist movement. The moment its economic and pecuniary demands will be met by the Narendra Modi government, it will dissipate, it will collapse, and it will, kind of retreat. The only thing is MSP, and that is why one of the unions, when it raised the issue of political prisoners jailed by the fascist government, the rest of the peasants' unions, they objected. They said that please don't raise political issues like that. We only want our economic demand to be fulfilled. That is the demand for remunerative prices from the state. So it doesn't have any anti-fascist potential. And in the contradiction between two factions of the ruling class, if the proletariat tail ends or the working masses, including poor peasantry, they tail end one of the factions of the ruling class, then it becomes a problem because the working masses lose any political agency. They lose any, independent political class position, and they surrender their class interest in that process to enemy classes, basically adversaries, our own adversaries. So this opportunism has two sources. One is knowingly and intentionally siding with the rich. For example, CPI and CPM side with the rich peasant because their politics represents the small capital of India, like all revisionist politics, all social democratic politics. Save small capitalism, save welfareism, stop big capital. That's what their conditio sine qua non is. Their horizon, political horizon, is saving small capital. That's all. And that's all they are doing. But even within the sections of revolutionary left, there is this opportunism, this right opportunism that we can see. But the source is not some kind of intentional dishonesty, but it is this deep sense of defeat that we are losing again and again repeatedly. There is one movement that has been able to, shake the Modi government. So let's support it. But tactical support is also done on some kind of common minimum agreement. What is the common minimum agreement between the rich kulaks and farmers, the principal oppressors and exploiters of agricultural proletariat and poor peasantry, and the poor peasantry and agricultural? There is no common minimum agreement. We have our own independent. That is the thing which requires to swim against the tide. Such an agenda, if somebody dares to set up, is going to be, cursed a lot in Indian left movement. And we are being cursed a lot because we are not uncritically celebrating or supporting the farmers movement right now. So yes, there are multiple sources of this opportunism in India.
Okay, the last person is Vishal. And if Vishal is
Yes.
there, please
Yes,
proceed.
yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Comrade Abhinav, I have maybe a total of 3 or 4 questions. So the first one is that you talked about some revisionist parties bringing up the concept of imperialist domination in agriculture. So could you explain on that? Expand on that and explain like why that is actually not going to be the case. And the next second question is so introduction of big capital into the agriculture will accelerate the depeasantization of the peasants, right? So more and more rural proletariat will be emerging out of the present situation. So many of these will have characteristics of the uh, petty bourgeoisie because they have recently been proletarianized, but some of the characteristics might remain. So this is very ripe ground for fascism to take root. So shouldn't we stop this from happening? And the third question is, have you seen any kind of Maoist involvement in this movement? And yeah, so the connected question to this is, who are the revolutionary left in your opinion? And do you have any criticism of the Maoists?
Okay. So about, the first question. The imperialist domination, when I talked about that, it refers to Prabhat Patnaik's thesis of, have you read, there was a recent book by Prabhat Patnaik and Utsa Patnaik. It is called A Theory of Imperialism, in which he refutes Lenin, and he says that the source of imperialism is the climate, different types of climates in different types of world. So what is happening is that the rich countries have a lot of stock of food grains, and there is no market for that food grain. And since these third world countries, they have become independent in food security, and they are producing enough staple diet food grains, etc. They cannot find any market for their excess stock of food grains, and that is why they want to destroy the agriculture of the tropical countries, which are more suitable for cultivation of these crops. They want to destroy that agriculture. Once the food security of these countries are destroyed, they will come under imperialist domination. I was refuting this theory. First of all, food security of India or any so-called third world country is not going to be destroyed by entry of corporate capital as such. First. Second, if you look at all the laws which destroyed small capital in different economic sectors, it was not the foreign capital which was the principal beneficiary. I will give you only one example. The foreign direct investment was increased to 100% in retail trade sector. Now we have, it is a few years old thing. We have seen the developments in last 7-8 years when FDI, 100% FDI was introduced. I guess 10 years. I think it was 2010-11. It was during United Progressive Alliance second tenure. So in last 10 or 11 years, in Indian retail trade economic sector, who is the principal beneficiary? Is it Walmart? No. Is it Carrefour? No. It is Ambani, Adani in the main. And all the foreign capital which have come to India in retail trade sector, they are working in collaboration as junior partner in Indian market, as senior partner in world market. So the Adanis and Ambanis who are entering into the retail trade sector, they are developing global links through these collaboration with foreign giants of retail trade. But in Indian market, they are not giving the major share to these. So first of all, India is a politically independent country. Indian bourgeoisie is not a comprador bourgeoisie. It's not a predominantly bureaucratic or commercial bourgeoisie. It's a predominantly financial and industrial bourgeoisie. It is not going to lose its political independence by giving away its food security. And food security is not based on MSP. as such. So the basic logic that I was trying to refute was the logic of Prabhat Patnaik. It is the same logic which CPM is giving right now. That once you stop, look at the causal chain of the logic. MSP is gone, government procurement is gone, incentive for growing rice, paddy and wheat is gone, incentive for growing rice, paddy and wheat is gone, then FCI is gone, PDS is gone, and food insecurity will creep in and will become dependent for our food supplies on imperialist countries. Wrong. In all countries which introduced structural adjustment program and liberalism in agricultural produce market before India, not a single country has lost food security. They are still food secure. So one is the point that if the market of agricultural produce is liberalized and made open for big capital, to assume that big capital is foreign capital and small capital is indigenous capital is wrong. We also have Indian big capital, and in Indian market, in every sector, it is the Indian big capital which is dominating, except one sector, which is automobile sector. Except one leading sector. In all leading sector, you see textile industry, cotton. You talk about any industry, it is not the foreign capital which is dominating within Indian market. So one is this. So it is not the it is an incorrect logic to put forward that if you do away with MSP, government procurement, PDS, and incentive for growing food grains will be gone. It's wrong. It's empirically you can prove that that is not going to happen by the example of one state of India, Bihar. I'll come to some stats of Bihar at the end of this answer. Second, it is doubtful that entry of big capital is going to accelerate the depeasantization of India. I'll give you one data. Just let me see. I have opened that folder in just a second. Because presenting the exact data would be more appropriate in this case. Yeah. So see, in Bihar, APMC Act was repealed in 2006, and APMC Act and MSP system was the strongest in Punjab. So just look at the rate of depeasantization in Punjab and Haryana, Haryana and Punjab and Bihar between 2005 and 2015. The rate of depeasantization in Bihar between 2001 and 2011 was 12.17%, whereas the rate of depeasantization in Haryana was 17.8%. If MSP and APMC is going to save small peasants and poor peasants, then Bihar should have higher rate of depeasantization than Haryana. Haryana, which has one of the most sound APMC and MSP system. In Bihar, you have a lot of big companies investing in contract farming, but still the rate of depeasantization is much lower than Haryana. Second, between 2001 and 2011, in 2005, in Bihar, the average size of big, landholders was around 20 hectares. But in 2016, the average size of large landowners' land holding decreased to 14 hectares, whereas the average size of the marginal peasant stayed constant at 0.25 hectare, and average size of small holding of small peasant remained constant at 1.25 hectares. So if we are to assume that doing away with MSP and penetration of corporate capital will necessarily increase the rate of depeasantization, the case of Bihar proves otherwise. But even if the rate of depeasantization is increased, if you look at the present support base of fascist forces in the countryside, it is not the agricultural proletariat. It is the rich farmers. Just look at Muzaffarnagar. What happened in Muzaffarnagar, Western UP? When all these things were happening, the riots happened in Muzaffarnagar. Sangeet Som is himself a big farmer. The entire support base of fascist rise after the departure of classic Kulak politics of Charan Singh. The entire support base in the countryside of BJP has been rich farmers. You take the example of Haryana, you take the example of Western UP, you take the example of Tarai Uttarakhand. Everywhere, it is the social support base of rich farmers and kulaks that BJP has taken over from kulak parties and rich farmers parties. So empirically, if you look at, yes, petty bourgeois character remains, but petty bourgeois character not necessarily expresses itself into as support for fascist forces. It might and it might not. Generally, the petty bourgeois character of the depeasantized proletariat is romanticist, and some portion of it goes to the revivalist politics often, but it is not a necessary outcome. And empirically in India, the depeasantized rural proletariat is not the main support base of fascism in the past 30 years. If you look at the long rise of Hindutva fascism, it started with the Ram Mandir movement in mid-80s. From mid-80s to 2020, it is 35 years. In 35 years, in no part of India, you'll find agricultural proletariat as the support base of BJP. The support base in the countryside is generally middle peasant, upper middle peasant, and rich peasant, Hindu sections. Third, the Maoist involvement is in the movement. I would just say that there must be some Maoist forces also involved in this movement, but I cannot make a definite comment on that. As far as the revolutionary left is concerned, we consider every organization left of CPM as revolutionary left. But that doesn't mean that we agree on the question of program and strategy and general tactics with them. For example, we consider CPIML New Democracy a revolutionary communist organization. We consider CPIML Red Star a revolutionary communist organization. We consider the Surkhli group of Punjab, one of the leading group of the present farmers movement, a revolutionary communist organization. But then they consider India as a semi-feudal, semi-colonial country. And the problem they face is that they are fighting for the demands of rich farmers. But the rich farmers are the exploiters of wage labor. They also raise the slogan of land to the tiller, but they cannot implement land to the tiller because that would mean taking away the land from big land owners and big rich farmers and kulaks. So they are like in a catch-22 situation. They can't decide what their strategic slogan is going to be for the farmers. Sometimes they call the farmers as the feudal lords, big farmers. When the farmers raise the demand of MSP, they fight for MSP. So they are not consistent in their position. Their position is very inconsistent, and that is a self-imposed inconsistency because of their programmatic outdatedness. They still believe that India is a feudal country, which India is not. They still believe that Indian bourgeoisie is a comprador bourgeoisie, which it is not. A comprador bourgeoisie can never produce fascism. Fascism is something which can be produced only by an industrial financial bourgeoisie. So their position is very laughable, ridiculous, and dogmatic and outdated. The bulk of revolutionary left movement. But as far as considering them revolutionary, yes, we do consider them revolutionary. We don't consider them revisionist. But we have serious disagreement on the question of program, strategy, and general tactics.
Okay, Abhinav, thank you very much. I know that I kept you up past 2 o'clock and appreciate it greatly. I hope you'll come back and make your presentation with the communist movement, which was supposed to be today's talk, but we postponed because of the urgency of this situation. And you also suggested. So thank you once again on behalf of our ICSS. We stay healthy and avoid COVID. You bring tremendous knowledge to us. And then our informal discussion will continue, minus Abhinav, so he can go to sleep. But we have another 10 minutes of informal discussion, and Norma wants to say something.
Can I make a quick announcement?
Yes,
Raj?
go ahead.
On January 3rd, we're going to be having a meeting for input and planning for next year. So please put that on your calendar. And on January 10th, Michael Roberts will be speaking on the story of the year of the COVID, but what now in 2021. Should be a very good presentation by Michael Roberts. So if you're interested, January 10th.
Sure,
That's great.
Raj, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, Abhinav, thank you very much for the presentation. Great to see you again after so many years. But I wonder if you have somewhere where we can go, and is there a website?
That we run, a website that we run.
Yes, that's the question.
Okay, okay. But most of these websites are in Hindi. That is the problem. One blog that you can refer to is redpolemique.wordpress.org.com. Sorry. Comrade Raj knows my blog, Red Polemique. That is the only thing that we have in English. But rest of the material is in Hindi. So that is one problem, limitation that we have right now, because we don't have enough translators. Arun here, who has joined us, has recently got our booklet on peasant question translated. So can you please, Arun, take email of all these comrades, and once Shishir checks the translation, and you can just mail all these comrades that booklet on peasant question. Okay. So that,
yeah, if he sends me those who wants to put down on chat room their email, they can do so now. But my email address is rsahai, SAHAI 1987 @gmail.com. So if you send me an email, I can certainly, anybody who wants to send me, I'll try to be the middle person here to facilitate the communication.
Yeah, so can you please write down your email in the comments section, Comrade Raj? So Arun will note it down and send you the book.
Yeah, I will do that right now. Yes.
And remind everybody that this session has been recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, ICSS Marxist, I think, and also on our webpage, icss.org. So that should be up. Usually, Mehmet does a real good job, so it should be up within by tomorrow, I think. Is that right, Mehmet?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
But thank you very much. This was wonderful, even though much of it was beyond me.
Okay, so
now, comrades, good night.
Okay.
I have to join a meeting early in the morning tomorrow.
Yes, thank you very much. Get a good sleep. Whatever hours you got left.
Let me add before you go what I'm proposing. Thank you very much for your work, presentation, etc., which I support entirely. The idea of subsidy was not in order to feed the rich with it financially, but in order to maintain the benefits of our behavior, our mutual behavior. It's a very communist outlook. Sharon reminded me that there is a socialist in between about ownership and so forth, and I hadn't thought about that. I think of it in a communist way. We want work that maintains to our humanity, and that is not subsidized. That is not mutually supported by a. We have, as I said, when I was ending my comments before, we have charity. Charity is a terrible thing. I'm sure they don't have or didn't have charity in Cuba, for example. What I want to suggest is that people look at a wholly different structure, layout of where our things are. I started out by talking about a health.
Abhinav, if you want to take off, go ahead, and we understand you have to leave. That's fine.
Yeah, but if you want to listen, I'll appreciate it. I'll enjoy that participation. You think of a healthcare clinic on every corner, and next to it, a place for my mother to buy a girdle, and next to that, a delicatessen, and then throughout down the block, a farm that people garden together or work together. And then in the middle of all of that, there's an opera house. Lay out the world that you might see in another way in your head. I put a note in the chat that says janitors are not born. No, engineers are not born any more than criminals are born. We live in a social structure, and we can make ourselves able to become what we would like to be instead of what the social obligation has been. I put a note in about how I had to become a teacher, I had to do teaching in order to make a living because I didn't know other things to do, and there wasn't much open to me at the time anyway.
Okay, thank you, Norma. So let's see, we only have 3 minutes remaining. If anybody wants to make a quick 30-second statement, please do. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question to ask. I wanted to get to this, but there were so many people asking questions that I didn't get a chance. So I think Abhinav made a very strong case about the fact that the MSP program really benefits really only the rich peasants, the top 5%. Is that correct?
Yes.
But I guess my question was, well, it was two questions. Number one, why was it that it seems that there are several hundred million people supporting the movement? And if it was such limited support, such limited benefit, why is there so much mass support? And number two, really, he was saying that it's not really a movement worthy of support by the working class, or was there a way to support it that it could be supported? I kind of missed those 2 points.
Yeah, I discussed this point, Alan, this morning with him on phone.
Oh, okay.
So I can tell you what he said. First of all, he pointed out to me that the strike, which was tens of millions, he said probably not as much as has been reported, 250 million, but there was a very substantial number of people who struck on November 26. But he said they were primarily striking for working class demands, not, it has been presented as in support of farmers. And so that he said that it should not be seen that way. They were not against it, but they were. Secondly, he said, a lot of these people are organized by CPIM, which he calls Social Democratic Party, and have a long history of organizing within the labor as well as peasant movement. But they have become, they were not originally, but they have become over time a social democratic party, according to him. And they draw a lot of people for social democratic demand, much like Bernie Sanders could draw. So his position is kind of a very minor position among the communists, but he's saying it's the correct position because this is, so even though for two things. One is that it should not be seen as they all turn out for the farmer support. Secondly, to the extent they turn out, it's also the influence of these links they have, these parties historically, and they're very active and they have tremendous organizational ability even now. So it's not invalid. People do oppose corporate control. So there's the question of opposing corporate control, as he said, is not the same as supporting farmers' movement. And so this is a binary. He was saying we have to get away. Working class has to have an independent position, but the voice of the working class is coming through these parties that are, he calls revisionist parties. So that's the answer. Arun, do you want to add something to it? Abhinav is not here, but Arun, maybe you can address it. Turn off your, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So actually, that's the main thing, since, we are most of the parties like CPM, they felt defeatist and all. So they're finding some space to create it, among these groups. So in that sense, basically this is a demand of intellectuals like P. Sainath, MSP politics and all. So most of the CPM left generally stood by the rich peasants, so it's not something new, which they kind of created space for themselves in the part of the movement. This has been coming from the times of Jayati Ghosh, when she formed a commission in Andhra Pradesh, and all. The basic demand mode was MSP. So yeah.
Okay. And now, Sainath, you mentioned he's very reputable journalist for rural affairs. He was with the Hindu for a long time. He's written a book. I met him here when he came here a long time ago in the 80s, I think. So, okay, well, that's about all I can add to it. And thank you, Arun, for your comment. So our time is up. So we're going to end this thing, and this will be up on YouTube channel ICSS Marxist. And if Mehmet does it, it'll be up tomorrow, otherwise day after. And so thank you very much, Arun, and everybody who's participated today.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.